Hello and welcome to the fourth of what are probably going to be about 8 premieres to cover June and July. Yes, patron premieres. This one's about Fisher's Courageous Flying Fish. Now, I have to admit, when this topic came up, I was going, well, that's fairly easy, isn't it? And then I thought, no, it's Fisher. There's actually quite a layer of complexity in this. And then there's what do they do with them? What do they do with them? And there's the fact that with carrier aviation, you are literally launching into a full-size fleet carrier as pretty much your first fully built carriers. Again, that doesn't seem abnormal for Fisher, because let's be honest, if he's going to jump into something, he's going to jump into it at full trot. But still, it does lead to some interesting scenarios. It does also lead to an interesting question of what happens to the other 4 15-inch guns. 15-inch turrets and the 8 15-inch guns, as well as the 18-inch guns. We'll leave that to one side. There are all sorts of things that could happen to them. They could go to monitors. They could go to a new build battlecruiser. There's honestly part of me just wondering whether he would actually stick a twin turret on every single one of the ships. But then I remembered he's an all or nothing kind of guy, so he would never go for such a halfway house. But I did actually wonder whether he would actually make 4 rather than 3 as well in terms of carrier forms, because if he doesn't have to worry about turrets, he's just literally building ships. And he doesn't even have to call them large light cruisers, because whilst then the moratorium's on capital ships, these are not capital ships, they're aircraft carriers. So he'd have 4 15-inch turrets running around. I'd say you might find an extra battlecruiser built. Maybe a Renown, maybe the 3rd Renown, and another 15-inch gun monitor. Both would be good options. Both would be good. Doing that would be really interesting options, and would give you potentially 3 Renowns as the basis of your battlecruiser force post World War One. Yes, you'd still have Hood and probably Tiger hanging around, but 3 Renowns? That's not just 50%, that's the overwhelming majority of your force. But that's not today's topic or today's question. What would he do with the extra 15-inch guns? No, today's topic is Fisher's Courageous Flying Fish. And it's the second of Blackburn Maximus's questions which got through. And actually it drew. It got 9 votes, along with another one. And so I put it to Brewship's Live tiebreaker. It'd be interesting for me to see what July's get. It'll be interesting for me to see what July's get. In this scenario, we are dealing with a World War I which goes as it did. We are dealing with a scenario where very much things stick to their historical pattern. The only thing that changes is the Courageous class. Based on the information from Tsingtao, which I'll be discussing in a second, the Siege of Tsingtao, and I'll be discussing how that could affect things, are aircraft carriers. Now, here is the advantage we have. There are designs we can draw from. There is Admiral Fisher, who does become historically a bit of an aviation savant slash... how do I put this? Supporter. Or, let's be honest, Fisher is more often in the style of agent provocateur than perhaps supporter. But he is He's very keen on aviation, so that does all fit. Anyway, that's a quick introduction. Today's video, of course, is a Patreon premiere, and as I've said before, and I'll say again, if you really, whichever of these gets the most comments, and I'm talking about comments below as well as chat, but most comments below preferably, because that's easier for me to read back, well, they might well get an actual proper live where I'm talking it through with you all and taking questions live while talking about it, instead of a premiere. I'd also like to add that I will hopefully be in the chat, and I will hopefully, he says, crossing fingers, hopefully be in the Discord server afterwards to chat away with you all and see what you thought of it. So, without much further ado, the shameless book plug. What we have in every single video, and what we need to have in every single video, because I love people joining me. I really enjoy you liking, sharing, subscribing to videos, and sharing them more, because, as I've said many times, and I'll always say, naval history might not be a communicable disease, but I do my best to communicate it to everyone. Loving it needs to be something everyone's infected with, in my opinion. And I'm not at all biased in that at all. But why is there a shameless book plug in my videos? Because I'm an academic, and because, as I've said before, I'd like a pension someday, and that means I need a full-time post at university. Not necessarily a full-time post, but a permanent post. Contract posts theoretically come with a bit of a pension, but it's a very tiny, tiny pension. Permanent posts, doesn't matter if they're part-time, full-time, what they are, you get a better pension. And it's either that or I manage to make YouTube have enough of income that I can add not just paying for my books and all the things which wonderfully support the channel, but also pay into a pension fund. Just so I don't have to worry so much when I finally reach the old age. I know, this is a strange thing to think about, but I suppose after 10 years, my accountant has finally reminded me that I am growing older. So yes, I do the shameless book plug, because books and their publication, their purchase are the ways that academics in the UK prove their value to universities and get hired and get promoted. So, shameless book plug, because no one else is going to advertise it for me but me. So let's talk about the Siege of Tsingtao, and this is a pretty interesting siege. What's forgotten often about this battle and this particular siege is that it has the second recorded air-sea battle in history. You're going to think, hang on, when did it start? When did that happen earlier in World War One? It didn't. And to be fair, it's a bit iffy on some of the data, but I'm prepared to roughly say that the Balkan Wars in 1913 certainly had something approximating an air-sea battle. I am going to say approximating it because the aircraft involved were really not that great by that point. And what you have is a Farman seaplane launched by the Wakamiya, pictured here, the seaplane carrier, attacked the Kaiserin Elizabeth and the Jaguar in Quezon Bay with bombs. Now, the interesting thing here is if they'd managed to actually do damage. I don't think they'd potentially sink the Kaiserin Elizabeth, but the Jaguar, the little Litis class gunboat built there in the 1890s sort of period, 1898 it was launched. We are talking about a vessel which quite literally had no armor. It had 4 88mm guns and 6 machine guns as armament. If it had managed to be sunk, it's only 1,000 tons. That would have been quite a big thing. especially when you consider the aircraft attacking and what it could actually carry. So this is the point. It's missed. They fail. But they don't keep failing. They do eventually succeed in some of their strikes, and the aircraft keep on attacking. The aircraft keep on causing damage. If they'd actually sunk something, it becomes quite an interesting scenario, because Jackie Fisher is never short in coming forward when he thinks he perceives the future of naval warfare. And you're also dealing with a Royal Navy which at this time has been successfully putting more and more efforts into dropping torpedoes from aircraft. Combine those two things, a successful attack in Tsingtao and the torpedo capabilities the Royal Navy is trying to build up at this point, the Royal Naval Air Service are trying to develop. Suddenly you have an interesting rationale. Suddenly you have something which no one else does have, and could completely spin things on the head. And let's be honest, that's what Fisher likes. Fisher despises war. This is one of his many redeeming qualities. He has many damning qualities, but he also has many redeeming qualities. And one of them is that he despises war. His desire is to build weapons so terrible no one ever wishes to wage war because of them. That's his dream. And you can say that's probably a more likely dream than people managing to successfully legislate out the existence of weapons, because there's always going to be someone who keeps hold of some of them. And that's going to be a problem, because it's not necessarily the person who hides them, it's the person whose those weapons fall into the hands of, and who then decides they feel like using them. That becomes the problem. So this then gives us a scenario of, what would it be based on? Well, HMS Hermes is a carrier that's quite literally built on a cruiser hull. They literally take a cruiser hull design and stick their designs of a carrier on top. Now, in this scenario, we're taking the designs of, I know it's called they're called large light cruisers, but let's be honest, battle cruisers, and putting the carrier stuff on top. Combine that with Eagle's idea, and you could be talking quite a big strike group. And when you consider this is going to be a purpose-built vessel from the get-go, that becomes incredibly interesting and incredibly intriguing. What is Fisher going to want? He's going to want to be fast. He's going to want to be big. And he's going to be wanting to carry a strike arm. He's probably also going to want to have a reconnaissance arm, because he's going to want to have them find their target. Find, fix, and strike the target. So find the target with reconnaissance aircraft, or aircraft doing the reconnaissance role. They could be the same aircraft which your torpedo strike aircraft, especially if they're two-seater. And then have someone fix the target by shadowing them. Again, from the air, very viable. What do the Germans have? The Germans don't going to have anything. It's not as if you're likely to run into fighters at this point. And then strike with everything you can. Okay, what are we looking at? Well, this is Jackie Fisher. I'd say we're probably looking at a carrier which has got to have a 72 aircraft capacity. 24 to be covering the 24 aircraft to be providing a sustained reconnaissance role in terms of your force generation, and the remaining aircraft being your strike and your massing of strike. It's going to be an aircraft carrier which, by the way, is going to sound very similar to what the Americans and Japanese conceive an aircraft carrier for. Mainly because the route of divergence for the British is the realities of when land-based power grows, and they're looking at operating in the Mediterranean and South China Sea, as well as the North Atlantic, as well as the North Sea, as well as the Pacific. But in this scenario, you're operating in the North Sea and North Atlantic. You can ignore that and fight as air defense. At this point, we're talking 1914, early 1914, 1915. That's still being worked on. An advantage is if you design with a large enough air group, they can do that. But interestingly enough, he could go for a single type of aircraft. It could be a two-seater torpedo bomber. That would not surprise me. Have navigation, so they would have navigation as well as the other stuff. But he could also go for single-seat torpedo bombers like the Sopwith Cuckoo. There are lots of options for Fisher to take and Fisher to pursue. And that's what really leads me to this slide. Oh yes, it is the potential stats. Now, you'll notice that 72 fits roughly in the middle. I have a 90 there. And to me, that would be carrying about 18 fighters and about 72 strike aircraft, but we'll leave that to one side. Hermes is up there. She's 600 foot long. That's 182.9 meters. Beam, 70 foot 3 inches, 21.4 meters in terms of beam. Draft, 23 foot 3 inches, 7.1 meters. Okay, Hermes is a baby. She's built on a cruiser hull. She's 11,020 tons in standard and 13,900 tons deep load. She has 40,000 shaft horsepower supplied by 6 water tube boilers supplying 2 steam turbine sets driving 2 shafts. Her top speed is 25 knots and she's armed with 6 5.5 inch guns and 3 to 4 inch AA guns and can carry 20 aircraft. Eagle, in contrast, is 667 feet 6 inches long. So she's only an extra 67 feet and 6 inches. She's, though, an extra 34 foot 10 inches wide at 115 feet. Oh, no, it's 44 foot 10 inches wide. Sorry, I forgot the 115. She's 26 foot 8 inches draft, so yeah, she's got an extra 3 foot and 5 inches on the draft. And 22,000 tons in standard, roughly twice. 32 boilers, supplying 4 geared steam turbines to drive 4 shafts with 50,000 shaft horsepower. Top speed 24 knots and 9 6-inch guns and 5 4-inch AA guns with an air group of 30. The joys of a conversion. These are going to be built up from the get-go as carriers. So if you base them on the Courageous class hull, they could be 786 foot 9 inches long. That's 81 foot beam. And 25 foot 10 inches draft. Roughly 18,000 tons of standard, because I didn't think you'd put in, well, I thought you'd keep to the very light armour scheme, and I don't think you'd probably put in, you've got that, not got the huge gun turrets. Yes, you're carrying aircraft, but let's be honest, those gun turrets, ammunition, everything, that's going to be quite a hefty amount. And 90,000 shaft horsepower supplied by 18 small tube boilers driving 4 geared steam turbines, or 120,000 shaft horsepower supplied by 24 small tube boilers, are both possible. If we consider the historic power supply of the class, and it's worthwhile considering, in their battlecruiser form, they had 90,000 shaft horsepower and 18 small tube boilers. Now you could put in more and get 120,000 shaft horsepower. And you're probably looking at 34 to 36 knots. i.e. 2 knots more than they achieved in their battlecruiser forms. 8 5.5 inch guns I've put in, because they seem to be popular with aircraft that carried designs at the time. And 4 4-inch AA guns. Now, the interesting thing is, if you go for the bigger option, which is a 20,000 ton standard hull and 24,000 tons fully loaded, That could take your 90 aircraft. We could start up with 90 aircraft in this period. It could take them. It could take 90 aircraft in this period. I would say the potential here is pretty darn great. And the potential, well, the advantage of that is that's not based on a Courageous class hull. If you're looking at those figures and thinking, Alex, that's awfully specific to go 794 foot at 1.5 inches, 242 meters overall. You would be right. That's based on the hull of HMS Renown and Repulse. That's me taking Renown and Repulse's hull, not worrying about the difference, not worrying about the size, being able to accommodate those hulls very easily. And just building based on them. So realistically, I've gone for a far more powerful design. They have 112,000 shaft horsepower from 42 water tube boilers, and they can achieve 32 knots with their size and shape. And displacement. In this scenario, we are taking out quite a chunk of displacement. We are taking out quite a lot of other issues. We're putting in small tube boilers and we're putting in 120,000 shaft horsepower. That's why I can sit here and go, yeah, I think this ship could have done 36 knots. Which would have made things very interesting, because honestly, if you're doing this, you're designing for a dash attack against the German coast. You're designing this fleet, these aircraft, to dash in and take out the Germans, or damage the German fleet and force them to come out. Alternatively, you're designing them with the idea of providing you with force security going through the straits around Denmark into the Baltic. Because, let's be honest, the aircraft can provide overwatch, reconnaissance, they can provide interception against German light naval forces, and more importantly than all of that, they can guide in your own forces and spot for your own forces to make them more lethal. All these things are very advantageous, and are something they're no doubt looking for. Now let's consider certain things. The schedule, for one. When I was looking at the schedule for Courageous and Glorious, you're waiting for certain things to be actually come along and be produced. You're waiting for certain key items. Those key items namely being turrets, which, yes, you've already ordered, and yes, were ordered for something else, but, you know, you're still waiting for them. What does a carrier have to wait for in this period? You could say lifts and designing lifts, but honestly, that's not that difficult. In this period, if we consider Hermes' construction and lifts were designed really quickly, and they were quite easily built. In fact, most of the yards were very happily having their own ideas and methodologies of lifts. So your main trouble might be ending up with two different types of lift. Armor. Well, the armor thickness on the Courageous class is not exactly that massive. It truly is cruiser grade armor. And when I say cruiser grade, I want you to understand that by cruiser grade, I mean atrocious for the role it was finding itself in. 2 to 3 inches of armor on its belt. Deck armors of 70.75 to 3 inches. But for an aircraft carrier, that's not a problem. Let's be honest, Hermes is not exactly the most heavily armored vessel known to mankind. She has a 3-inch belt and deck of 1-inch thickness, and, well, they don't need the armor for the barbettes, the gun turrets, the conning tower. They might have the torpedo bulkheads, still. Then we got, well, do they wait for the triple 4-inches? Do they want to have the triple 4-inch as their anti-surface weapon? They might go with the triple 4-inch. Honestly, they might. And they might go with the 3-inch for the anti-aircraft guns as their options. I'm not sure. 6 triple 4s for 3-inch single freeze? Yeah. They're not going to need torpedo tubes. I doubt they're going to have that. Because why would you? And again, it's not fitted to Hermes. I know Fisher likes torpedo tubes, but there's a limit to how much he likes them. And this is not a ship which is supposed to get into direct combat. Its escorts will get into combat. It won't. This is about giving a fast-moving capability to fleet assets. And that's where the question becomes of, are free built or more? Again, this is Admiral Fisher we're talking about. He has a ship which in his mind is the new capital ship, the coming vessel, but which isn't in the mind of the government. It's a new asset. It's a new capability. And the only really long lead item he has to order, and he's going to be ripping as many of them off Agincourt, the battleship, as he can, and that's the only vessel which fits with the ordering of small tube boilers, because we know exactly where all the boilers go from all the R's. We know exactly, we can trace them and where they go. What we can't trace are the boilers for Agincourt. But we know the small tube boilers that are put historically in Courageous and Glorious are ordered in 2 batches, in that the vast majority arrive early, and then more arrive to fill out their numbers. And the Agincourt I'm talking about is the Queen Elizabeth class Agincourt, the 6th vessel. So, there's your options. In which case, did they get laid down in March 1915, or did they get laid down earlier? March, May and June. Well, if you're ordering 1, 2 or 3, I think it fits. But I wouldn't be surprised if you're ordering more. I think if he does it, he's ordering 1 in March, 1 in April, 1 in May, and 1 in June, and 1 in July. And possibly 1 in August as well. He's probably launching them out. And he's going to be thinking about Gallipoli, he's going to be thinking about his Baltic plan, he's going to be thinking about the fleet, the battlecruiser fleets, everything. Yes, he's got conversions coming, but these are the next generation. These are the future. Historically, they are launched and built fairly quickly. We are talking 11 months between laying down and launching for both Courageous and Glorious. And we're talking 8 months between launching and commissioning for Courageous, and 6 months for Glorious. Now, honestly, some of that time is waiting for 15-inch guns to be fitted, and sighting them and stabilizing them properly, and all sorts of things which you have to do because they're big, heavy objects. Some of that is delayed due to armor production. And in terms of shaping and fitting the armor, yes, they're using cruiser armor. Yes, the Royal Navy's, the British industry is producing that by the barrel load. But you still have to shape it to the individual ship. Carriers are going to require less of this. And Fisher's going to take advantage of that. So I think you get 6 ships, and I think they're going to be quicker to launch, quicker to launch, and quicker to completion. Now, the interesting thing is going to be working them up, because what aircraft are going to be available for them? I'm thinking you probably shave a month off the time between laying down and launching and get it down to 10 months. I'm thinking in terms of commissioning, you're going to run, let's say, run at the 6-month mark. That seems about correct. In which case, you're not going to get any in time for Jutland. You're not. March 1915 to February, if you make it down to 10 months, you're in January. 6 months after that, you're in July. The Battle of Jutland is 31st of May to the 1st of June. Saying that, though, again, That's if they're built according to existing historical timeline, which requires a lot of careful calculations and things chucked together for trying to get those guns to work on the minimum sized hull. You're not getting guns to work. Again, those calculations don't need. You are putting together the maximum size hull you can for an experimental carrier. An experimental design. And to be honest, you're probably going to find some safety in not knowing what you don't know, and that could accelerate things. And which means they could start even earlier. So I'm saying 16 months from laying down to completion is the rough timeline I would think they would take. Rough being it. It's my estimations based on how hard he works and the viability of them. If you're going, especially if you're going for the larger design, it's actually in a way easier to get that, because a larger design has space to forgive, which sounds strange, but it does. It has space to forgive. Now, are they going to get the world's fastest lifts? No, they're not. Are they going to get the world's best flight deck design? Probably it's not going to be rounded properly. It's probably going to be flat and straight the whole way. Are they going to have accelerators, as the Royal Navy would insist on calling them throughout the 1920s and 30s and well into the 1940s? Because they are different from the catapults put aboard ships. Probably not. They might have a catapult system, though. Are they going to maybe have recovery facilities for seaplanes? Potentially they will on the stern, a la Hermes. Will they have an island structure? Yes. But potentially it's easier to build the bigger ones. And build them quickly. And there are yards certainly available. So, Sop of Cuckoo. Originally ordered October 1916 by Commodore Murray Surter. He was obsessed with naval aviation, and he was obsessed with torpedo attacks from aircraft. It was his raison d'etre, his entire belief, his entire focus. And whilst I don't think there is any timeline likelihood where it works out there are aircraft available for Jutland, I do think if you have Sutter put in charge in 1915, whilst he put in charge of naval construction by 1915, he'd been in charge and obsessed with torpedo aircraft since 1913. If you do this in 1914, if you put him in charge, as Russell Singtal, and you give him the instructions to develop it, then he can probably order something like the Sopwith Cuckoo in 1914, early 1915, latest. And when does it enter service? Probably not long after the aircraft. Let's be honest, aircraft development times in this period were not great. Sopwith Pup actually entered service in October 1916, and I have to remember that's the first proper fighter for carrier operations, the first proper land plane fighter used for them, from Furious, actually in her modified form. So yeah, this is looking like an air group. And as I said, my strong suspicion is if Fisher pushes this through, Fisher is going for the 90 aircraft air group. And I think he's going for squadrons of 18, which were fairly part of the pattern of the Royal Naval Air Service at that time, and probably 5 of them. I would say a fighter squadron and 4 strike ones. Now, again, please note, I have discussed recently in other videos, but the Sopwith Cuckoo is not exactly the largest aircraft known to mankind, especially not when its wings folded up, although it's interesting seeing that happen. And the Sopwith Pup is definitely the largest aircraft known to mankind. So if you're sitting there going, oh, that's a huge air group, how's it going to fit it? They're quite small aircraft. It's quite a bit larger than the actual Courageous and Glorious and historically were. And it's also far more efficient because it doesn't have the same funnel issues, etc. that Courageous and Glorious have, because it's designed from the ground up as a carrier. So it has the funnels built in such a way they fit with it being the carrier role. And again, if you follow the early Hermes design, and that's basically what you're doing, is you're putting a Hermes-like structure or an Eagle-like structure on top of a battlecruiser hull, you should be okay. It's not going to be setting the world on light in World War II carrier, but it's World War One. It's going to be frigging dangerous. Frigging dangerous. And so it's possible, and what will happen? Well, this is where things get interesting. There are roughly 2 scenarios we can work through. And then we have to talk about the post-World War I scenario if they've pulled it off. BD has a plan from 1919, which not less than 121 machines to be carrying the specifically fitted ships to within not more than 1 hour's flying from Wilhelmshaven. This rendezvous to be reached at or before daylight. Planes to be flown from ships in flights of 40 so as to reach their objective in strong forces in close succession. That's all fairly decent and fairly solid stuff. And if we think about it, it makes a lot of sense. But I'd add on to that. Now you're talking about maybe post-Jutland scenario where these ships are coming into service. And you want to buy extra time for the Royal Navy to rearm. You want to destroy the German advantage. You could be happily going and launching, taking 3-4 carriers. And maybe you launch in strikes of 36 from each carrier in each wave. So there's 2 waves. 2 waves of 144 aircraft. That's a lot of aircraft. And that's 4 carriers worth. That's 4 carriers worth. With that many aircraft, and yes, okay, they haven't developed yet the whole belly flop system, tension wire, etc., to make sure the torpedoes run shallow. Let's think about it. Would the attack work? Well, barring the Germans getting wind of it before it happens, and so managing to move, I don't know, Richthofen and his flying circus, it doesn't matter who. Someone, a lot of fighters into the area to put up a defensive screen. There's not much they can do. Or move the ships out to sea. They're manoeuvring at sea, they're fine. But if they're in harbour, they're still damaged. The ones that are less damaged are moored in lines like this. Torpedo netting is a thing for other people. It was occasionally tried out in Wilhelmshaven, but mostly at this time there's the idea they have the defences to keep submarines out of Wilhelmshaven. So they don't need it in there. If that's the case, well then, that means they're lined up like this. And it's going to be more difficult to attack some vessels than others. It truly is. But it's also not going to be impossible. And if you're dealing with 288 aircraft dropping torpedoes over 2 waves, let's say 40% of those torpedoes run true and don't hit the bomb. That's what? 80, 80 plus 40% of 88. Let's just cancel out the 8 at the top and just go for 32, so we're at 112. And let's say only half those hit their targets. Or hit anything. That's 56 torpedoes. Against ships which are mostly sitting in harbour, which could be surprised, might have their could have all their doors open, all sorts of things, and it's not good. That's a tremendous amount of damage, and the thing is, if it works, yes, you can put in defences, but the British will come back and try again. I get another couple of carriers in service. The thing is, the attack's going to sink enough, damage enough. It's going to make whatever happened at Jutland look like, no, it happened. So what? You now can't hide in harbour. You have to come out and fight us. Or lose your fleet. Or withdraw into the Baltic. That's probably what the German fleet does. Any ships which are capable of sailing will be withdrawn through the Kiel Canal that day. Other side will be in the Baltic. As far away from the British fleet as they possibly can. And that pretty much hands the North Sea coast to the British. Yes, there are going to be still submarines and mines there, but honestly, if you can turn up with sufficient force and you're not risking capital ships, because you don't need to risk capital ships because the German capital ships can't come get you unless they come through the Kiel Canal, which is a big kerfuffle, and you can have your battle fleet standing off far further back nice and safely, away from the zone. You can let forces like the Harwich Force rack it up and down the coast. And while they're doing that, monitors, the pre-dreads, they can move in close. They can do what they need to do in all the bombardments. So with this in mind, there is a curious thing here. And it was something which occurred to me. And we've been talking about the Baltic Plan for years on this channel. And I will always stand by every single time where I've said the Baltic Plan is one of the most idiotic plans known to mankind. In the way that Fisher was planning on executing it. Because having Courageous, Glorious and Furious to charge through the shallow bits instead of using, I don't know, cruisers and destroyers to charge through the shallow bits just is not sensible. It's just not needed. It's truly not needed. And if you're forcing a way through, that's probably going to be after you've already... It's got to be after you've already destroyed a healthy part of the German high seas fleet. So why do you want some specialist large light cruisers to go in offside? It's just... You can use light forces to do that, and you can send your heavy forces through the other way. In fact, it's probably better if you do that. Light's what you can put the resource in light forces. But what about with aircraft carriers? Well, with aircraft carriers, you can theoretically be attacking over the islands. Any enemy forces massed on the other side can come under attack by mass torpedo strikes. That could actually help you push through. And especially if this comes after you've done an attack on Wilhelmshaven. So you've had Jutland, which has damaged the German High Seas Fleet and damaged their morale. And then you've had Wilhelmshaven, and you've damaged them further and forced them back through the Kiel Canal into the Baltic. Well, now you've got them forced back already. So next time you turn, maybe you do have the Harwich Force or some other group demonstrating along the coast. The Channel's forces could be moving up the coast, could be moving up here. HMS Dreadnought leaving them. We all know she likes to do an anti-submarine operations. She might have been the first original Dreadnought battleship, but she likes her anti-submarine warfare operations. So what do they do next? Well, they push on. If you then do an attack into the Baltic under that scenario, yes, you are heading into the enemy's toughest, thickest minefields, and their submarine literal training centers for their U-boats. So these are not advisable places to go. But that's if you try and fight your way through and want to go right down to the coast of Germany. What happens if you're just using the high speed of your carriers? Dashing in with the Grand Fleet supporting them, close enough to come through and support them if the enemy try to come out. Demonstration going on the other side. You listen for radio movement, listen to see if the Germans are moving. If they're moving, you wait, and then you hit Kiel. When they are gathering to go up there, when they're organising. When they're trying to go through the canal, that's going to be one of the points where they're going to be bunched together. If you're sending the force through the canal to try and stop the force harassing the North Sea coast of Germany, well, it can't afford to arrive in dribs and drabs. It has to arrive as a solid group, which means you have to group it up to go into the canal. You have to have it going through as solidly grouped as possible within the requirements of the canal. And once they've started entering the canal, there is very little room for little room to strike them, but also you've got the group lined up behind them. So there's only so many ships which can go through a canal at a time, but you want them to be ready to go through because you want them to be going through as quickly as possible. The reason there's only so many ships that can go through the canal at a time is so that you don't damage the canal. That's a perfect target. And again, you don't actually have to force your way into the Baltic for the aircraft to be in range to do that. You don't have to do that. You could launch the strike from somewhere in sort of this bit over, well, my hands directly up from there, above, sort of somewhere on the orange line area. Helpfully positioned itself. And I left it there because it was helpful for that. You could do that. And then, if you've damaged them, well, then with a suitable scenario of trawlers in the front, probably followed by pre-dreadnoughts, filled with some sort of cork and all the cork in their hulls, in a place you can put it, and all the compartments that can be sealed up, so that they're airtight. Go through. They'll hit many mines. They'll go through several minefields, but do it. And you can now dominate. The minefields won't be in those straits areas, because that's Danish territory. It'll be the other side, once you're approaching Germany, that you're going to run the risk of them. And you can avoid them if you're sensible. You push your way in. Danish aren't going to be happy with you, because the Germans are going to want to try and invade Denmark to try and stop you. But let's be honest, that's not a good position for them to do. If you want to be really cruel to the Germans, you give the Danish just enough warning. Not that they can stop you, but enough warning that they can prepare their border guards to prevent the Germans making a rapid incursion into Denmark. There aren't really German forces available to do a rapid incursion to Denmark in 1916. Late 1916, early 1917. There just aren't. So you attack Wilhelmshaven in October 1916. You could be launching this attack January 1917, maybe even earlier, might even do it in December. 1916. Christmas Day, 1916. Wait until the afternoon, where everyone's starting already to get merry and be happy. Launch the strikes. Possibly not midday, because you want to have the German fleet form up and head to Kiel. And they are probably going to be based in Kiel, because the two big naval bases for Germany are Wilhelmshaven and Kiel. They're the two big naval bases. Yes, they have a decent base at Hamburg, and they have a decent base at Danzig. But Danzig is well back here. It's Poland. And Hamburg... Well, they could have fled there from Wilhelmshaven. They could have gone to Hamburg, but then that gives you a whole different issue to try and attack. But there again, from the British perspective, that's pushing into the minefields there to launch an airstrike on Hamburg. I think the Germans are more likely to head to Kiel. Kiel will feel safe for them. And it's a big base which has facilities for maintenance and all sorts of stuff there. You need a lot of support to be able to maintain a fleet the size of the High Seas Fleet, even when it's been reduced. And Hamburg, as capable as it is more of a construction and outfitting rather than sustainment base in this time period. It's kind of like you wouldn't base the Royal Navy's fleet at Chatham. You'd build them at Chatham. You might go and send individual ships to be repaired at Chatham, but by this period, you're not maintaining a fleet at Chatham. Not in a service fleet. You maintain them at Plymouth, Portsmouth, Rosyth. That's where you maintain them. You operate them from Scapa Flow, or from Rosyth, or from Plymouth or Portsmouth, or Falmouth, or Harwich. Chatham is sustainment. Chatham is maintenance, repair, and Hamburg's roughly is sort of the same. Pushing into the Baltic itself, well, once you've done enough damage to the High Seas Fleet, if you're able to therefore send in trawlers, send in vessels to clear the minefields that are in the way, and to conduct anti-submarine sanitization operations, and may be able to use those same strike aircraft to attack submarines in harbour, because let's be honest, submarines once they're damaged are not things you want to go down underwater in. Doesn't require much to damage a submarine to the point at which no one wants to dive in it because they know they're not coming up. Then you can actually push the Baltic plan through. It's not the way that Fisher planned it, but it actually becomes possible. And that's the really curious thing to think about. Okay, I'm changing the plan completely. Well, I'm changing the timetable and methodology of the plan completely, but I'm not changing the aims of the plan. And it could actually work. There is almost a possibility, an answer here, that with Fisher's Baltic plan, it's that he showed how conservatively innovative he was. Because he wasn't innovative enough to really think through what actually could work. Instead, he was trying to make his earlier iterations of ideas fit the plan, rather than think what other ideas available at the time could fit the plan and make it work. And the whole point with the aircraft capability is that they allow you to overfly a lot of the obstacles. And in Surta, and Murray Surta, who I've talked about before on this channel, he had someone who was full of these ideas to go and talk to. This shows my ongoing issue with Fisher, his inability to use his staff. He likes to do everything himself. And that worked okay in a certain period of First Sea Lords and Senior Admirals. We're talking the late 1850s onwards. To about 18, and about the early 1900 latest. And you could get away with that at that point because there aren't any really big wars going on. But then you go back to the age of sail when we talk about these admirals, and it's all these admirals so important, that admiral. You look at them and go, they have staff. The question I'm always getting is, what were the women on the ships doing? The wives of the captains and or senior officers when they were aboard ships, their wives and daughters there, and friends. Well, they're often acting as the comms team, sending out messages, returning up. Think about this. Do you think the Admiral writes a personal letter to every one of his 40-odd captains? He'd never not be writing. He'd never have time to do anything else. Let alone thinking and the instructions won't get out in time. You need to write letters so they can be dispatched to the fleet tonight to prepare them for tomorrow. Well, what you do is you write out a letter. Maybe you write, one or two might be given out personally to your senior officers. The rest get written out by the ladies. They act as your staff. And they often are the wives and daughters of naval officers themselves. And they've spent their entire lives around it. So they often offer critique. There are quite a few stories of admirals having critique from these ladies. And then they also have their flag lieutenants and some of the ship's officers to assist and all these things. And their flag captain, etc. will all be involved in the process. You had a staff. But it was at a time and pace when you could afford to have a staff which was handwriting out letters, which gives you a lot of time to think things through. When you have to make decisions more quickly, you need more information available at the click of your fingers to be able to make those decisions. You need to be able to ask for, I need this, and they need to be available for it. And that's where you sort of start to build up a staff. This scenario, the Baltic plan, it truly, to me, has always shown, to an extent, Fisher's disconnect from what his staff and things were going. And don't get me started on Gallipoli. But in this scenario, the thing is, if he'd worked with his staff, he could have actually made his plan, which I've always said that the actual carrying it out he was planning to do was terrible. The idea of blocking off Germany from its Baltic trade will end the war in days. I mean, you do that, you've cut Germany's ability to import completely from anything it needs. Weeks at best, but days probably, because there's so many supplies they need to take in. But the thing is, to do it is going to require you doing that with your aircraft carriers, and probably getting the army on side, and probably getting some troops to reinforce Denmark. Because Denmark's not going to have a choice. The moment you push through, they're going to be in a war. And you basically can tell them, well, would you like us to give you some reinforcements as we go through? Because we're going through. Would you like some troops? But it could actually have worked if he talked with his staff. So what's the post-World War One? Well, these pictures are actually provided of a conversion of the G3s and the Admiral class, courtesy of Dodders. And the reason I put this here is because here's the interesting thing. If that all happens, then a question starts to become as to what HMS Hood gets laid down as. Now, she's laid down September 1916, and Anson, Howe, and Rodney are laid down in November and October 1916. Well, under this scenario, there's a big strike launched in October 1916. And if it's successful, if it's just successful, what are the admirals and senior officers going to judge at this point? Are they going to go, ooh, what we need is more battle cruisers, or are they going to go, do we need more carriers? Hood still might be completed as a battle cruiser, but if this option, and then it's, especially if it's followed up by the Baltic plan actually being carried out in some way, shape, or form, Anson, Howe, and Rodney might not get finished as battle cruisers. They probably get cancelled as suspended as they traditionally do. But they might actually get completed, especially depending on how far up they are, as aircraft carriers. If you've just got these large hulls, battlecruiser hulls, and you've already built carriers based on battlecruiser hulls, you've now got bigger battlecruiser hulls, you can build even bigger and better carriers. And you could end up with war ending with the Royal Navy having 6 or so, between 3 and 6, I think at least 4, but I can see it possibly being as many as 6, of the Furious class carriers, and 3 Admiral class carriers. Or 6 Courageous class carriers and 3 Admiral class carriers. That's going to have an impact on things, because if the Royal Navy is then looking at building capital ships, which they will be, because you want capital ships as well as carriers, they're not going to, aircraft are not going to become so great they're going to be transitioning from aircraft carriers, from capital ships at the end of World War One at this point. Please note, the Cuckoos are probably going to prove very disappointing at attacking moving targets at sea. They're going to be great for striking on things in harbour. They're going to be great for doing air defence, great for doing reconnaissance, great for bombing targets and strikes, etc. They're going to be very useful for doing that, and the Royal Navy is really, really going to be happy. If they found a way to get a fleet from hiding in harbour so they can go and get it, they are going to pound down on that option to be really secure so it never happens again. Yeah. The Royal Navy could have 9 quite big carriers. And that's going to have an effect on a lot of things. A treaty system. Does Hermes get built? Probably not. Or maybe she does. Maybe she's the next generation of carrier constructed. Or they're trying to build a smaller carrier and see what they can do with it on the cruiser hull for the escort mission. In which case, though, if they've already had the fleet carriers, let's call them, go through and prove well based on a smaller battlecruiser hull, they might order more of the Hermes class. You could theoretically have another 6 of those laid down, along with the Admiral class conversions. The Royal Navy could literally end World War One with 15 carriers, either in service or under construction. 6 cruiser carriers, 6 fleet carriers, and 3, we'll call them large fleet carriers. And Hood. And Renown and Repulse. And whatever the other 4 15-inch gun turrets went into. The other scenario is if war ends in 1917, well, let's be honest, the most costly year of war the British fought in World War One was 1917-18. That was what cost the most money. You're going to have an interesting impact on debt, but also an interesting impact on other relationships, on relationships with America, etc., post-war. The Americans barely got into the war, and it started, and it's barely before it got into the war when it's ended. I mean, but they didn't join when it started, but it barely started to get into the war, and it's over. Then a lot of Wilson's bargaining capital goes. A lot of the stuff which drew people to the Washington Naval Treaty goes. And it's also prior to the April Fool's Day decision of handing the Royal Navy in 1918, April Fool's Day, handing the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, Royal Naval Air Service, over to the Royal Air Force. If the Royal Navy's used them this way, and they've done this, do you see admirals like Jellicoe and Beatty handing over the Royal Naval Air Service without a fight? They might well go, okay, yes, we will hand over our land-based squadrons or something like that, but the carrier-based squadrons never. Carrier-based squadrons are now a core part of the naval effort. And they could have as many as 15 carriers under construction. I could see that happening, because the reason I can see that happening is because Britain could still be building the carrier based on the cruiser, like Hermes, because they still want that as a presence asset for patrolling some of their operations. The fleet carriers got built, the Courageous class, because they did that to do the duty of what Fisher envisaged of the Baltic plan, and were also used to attack Wilhelmshaven. And the Admiral class, well, if you decide that after the full information is coming from the Battle of Jutland, that frankly you don't want battle cruisers like that anymore, you've now got 3 large hulls, and you've got something you can do with them that makes them very useful. And you've got that something which you can do with them that makes them very useful, very visible in 1917, because you've just used it for all sorts of things. You don't suspend them, you convert them. And so, if you have a Washington Treaty in 1920, well, the Royal Navy is going to be all in on the carriers. What happens under that scenario? Depends. If cruiser carriers are counted as cruisers by the treaty system, if the treaty system actually happens, you could have a lower limit of, I don't know, probably 15,000 tons. Because Hermes will probably come in a little bigger than she does historically, probably somewhere in the region of about 12,000 tons, because of the way the others have grown. And you might have ordered some sort of cruisers to work with them as well. So you might keep it to 12,000 tons, you might run it up to 15. Because that's a nice logical ton. Your capital ship policy, I have no idea where that goes, because there are going to be lots of people worried about air power at this point. And that could mean they go up to 40,000 tons, it could mean they try and keep it at 35,000 tons. And then your aircraft carrier policy, well, if the Royal Navy's got 3 Admiral class carriers and an Admiral class battlecruiser in service by that point, or pretty much in service or coming into service by that point, plus those other 12 carriers, rest of construction, etc. Let's say they're 12,000 tons, the small ones. So that's 72,000 tons of carrier. And if we remember the earlier figures which we were talking about, for this carrier in standard, for the big carrier, which is what we're going to, that's 20,000 tons of standard, so that's 120,000 tons if they've got 6 days. So that's 192,000 tons. If we think about what an Admiral class carrier would probably be, I'm going to say it's going to be 40,000 tons, okay? It's going to be twice the tonnage. Because it's a far bigger, far more powerful ship than they were. It could be 35,000 tons. Let's go with 35,000 tons because again, it's got it's all they're only partially built, etc. Da 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 da. So and the British have got the experience of carriers. They're not. It's only it's fine. Let's go for 35,000 tons. Actually, so that's 105,000 tons. You are talking the British already having 197,000 tons worth of carrier under construction or in service. No. 297,000 tons. What do you do if you're the US? And what do you do for a treaty system that's right? Do you go, you're allowed 10 35,000 ton standard aircraft carriers? 15 capital ships? Do you divide the small carriers? Things less than 15,000 tons, no limit. Things more than 15,000 tons, because that takes away 72,000 tons, so that takes you down to 225,000 tons. Let's say you're allowed a maximum standard displacement of 35,000 tons. 5 times it's not going to be enough. There's still 225,000 tons. You needed multiples of 5 for it to work out in the treaty system as it was put in, so you'd still end up with, you're just giving the British a whole load of construction space. That's the last thing you want to do. This makes the treaty system very complicated. Whatever scenario you have, let's say you go with 35,000 tons. The British are 200, let's say 297,000 tons. Well, that gives them 53,000 tons to build some carriers on. So 26,500 ton carriers they could build, 2 fleet carriers, which would be bigger than their Courageous class, but smaller than their Admiral class. What did the Americans respond with? Did they go with 10 35,000 ton carriers? Well, the trouble is then the British have 17 carriers to their 10. And whilst, yes, the 10 carriers individually might be stronger than all the cruiser carriers, etc., and probably will be stronger than the Courageous class, the quantity that the British will have is going to be something which Congress is going to think about, and Japan is going to think about. And also, that's before we get into the whole fact of, if you've allowed them that, then Japan's got 210,000 tons of carrier they can build. And France and Italy. If you've used carriers so much, and if they've worked these things through, even if they've had problems, they, instead of going to be something which has come of which has started to grow but has yet to come of age in the 20s and 30s, they are something which is going to be viewed as almost having come of age. They're going to be a proven yet not immature technology and ship. And that's going to make any treaty system very difficult. If the pro-treaty groups can actually get a treaty through. Remember, it was a lot of American political capital went into getting that treaty, which is why it's done in Washington. And if the Americans, historically, they joined in April 1917. The war we've just discussed, if the British entered the Baltic in late December 1918, how long the Germans managed to maintain a war effort into 1917 is up for debate, but I don't think I can see it getting to April. If they've lost control of the Baltic, and they've lost control of their coast, and they're not getting the imports they need in terms of food, especially, across the Baltic, because of the way they've mobilized their forces, and this is the trouble, once you totally mobilize your forces, especially the way they did it, You remove a lot of the workforce from your agricultural sector, you remove a lot of the workforce from your industrial sector. That's necessary of a total war mobilization. But the trouble is, once you've lost those people to go to war, or probably maybe lost them completely, they might not be able to come back. And in fact, they probably won't be able to come back. It's not good. If war's over before the Americans join, I really do not see a treaty system happening. Which could make life a lot easier. But if the treaty system does still happen, if you do get a meeting like this, there will be a very different approach to aircraft carriers. If Britain has built its cruiser carriers, i.e. Hermes and maybe some others, and again, the thing is, the more useful carriers prove in fleet operations, etc., the more likely cruiser carriers are going to get built quickly, because it's going to be a case of, oh, let's expand these ideas to Overwatch to deal with the surface radar issues and the submarine issues, because where can we put a cruiser carrier? We don't want to use a fleet carrier because that's a big expensive asset. Where can we put a cruiser carrier? That's literally what Hermes is being built as. They are literally building a carrier on a cruiser hull to fulfill the cruising role, was one of their part of their discussions about us. So, if she's being used in that, if they're building those in that fashion, you could have a very different world scenario. You either don't have a treaty, or if you do have a treaty, you have to figure out a way to function in aircraft carriers. And again, you might have that whole cruiser limit. You might have them just go through and go, okay, the limit is 15,000 tons. Below that, you can build as whatever you like, as many of them whatever you like, in terms of carriers and in terms of any ship which fits under 15,000 tons. Historically, they did up 10,000 tons based on the Hawkins class. If they round up to 15,000 tons, they can fit in light carriers, etc., and everyone's fine. They don't need to do that. They can make that their sort of maximum. But that still gives them a problem with aircraft carriers, because you're going to have a lot of 35,000 ton ones in service. At least 3. And a lot of 20,000 ton ones in service. And the British aren't going to want to get rid of any of their 3. And as grandfathering Hood is one thing. I suppose you could have a rule that anyone could convert ships up to a certain number to 35,000 tons as a carrier. Or you... Well, the British have 6 20,000 tons, that's 120,000 tons. Historically, it's a 135,000 ton limit, which was based on 5 27,000 ton vessels. You could make it so that every navy is allowed allowed 125,000 tons in vessels of up to 25,000 tons. So that's 5 ships of 25,000 tons, or 6 of 20,000 tons, if you're the Royal Navy at this point. You're allowed as many 15,000 ton vessels as you want, and you're allowed 5 vessels of up to 35,000 tons in standard. That could be the way you get away with it. You basically create the large fleet, well, the fleet carrier, the light fleet carrier, and the escort carrier. Or cruiser carrier, as the British would probably insist on calling it at that time. As order of things. But then that means the British get to do 2 more ships, and it could be that all the large ones have to be conversions for your first generation. In which case, that is C. Dodder's G3 conversions, probably, are the next... A pair of those being converted on 35,000 tons would be interesting. I could see the Royal Navy stretching the legitimacy of that one. But yeah, that's going to be an issue. That is really interesting. And if you're getting down to that granular level in carriers, do you get to the granular level, instead of having the capital ship concept, do you have, you're each allowed 5 battle cruisers, and if you're, 5 battle cruisers and 15 battleships? Because if you're allowed 5 fleet carrier, 5 large fleet carriers, oh, no, 5 fleet carriers, 5 light fleet carriers. You might go, everyone's allowed 5 battlecruisers, but the US Navy doesn't have any battlecruisers. They've got to build the Lexingtons, and they've not built those yet. You could go, everyone's allowed 5 battlecruisers of up to this weight. Let's say they make Hood the basis of that one, 45,000 tons. So allowed 5 up to 45,000 tons of battlecruisers, and then you're allowed 15 battleships, let's say, of up to 30. Well, if you're allowed 45,000 ton battlecruisers, you cannot let the battleships be too small. So maybe you set it at 40,000 tons. But this is all going off a whole different tangent, I do realise. But the reason I'm talking this all through and I'm bringing this all up is the question I want to ask in this video, and I always ask questions at the end of my videos, is how do you think the world changes? And I'm trying to give you an overview of how I start that process off by asking a lot of questions. That is how you have to think about how does this change the world? Because it won't be the same as it was. You can't. Once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. And again, if we consider with the Admiral class, think about how quick it will be to convert them, rather than trying to add in armor, rework the hulls for the hull for more armor, rework the hull for all the things they want to add in to try and turn them from battle cruisers, i.e. 2 words, Fisher inspired, to battle cruiser, 1 word, to fast battleships was their ultimate aim. Their idea was to try and transition them all the way to a fast battleship. They didn't, with Hood, they just got to battle cruiser, 1 word, and they were trying next to try and work out how to transition them all the way to fast battleships. Worked out it was too frigging difficult, and so instead ended up building the G3s, which were battle cruisers, 1 word, but were so frigging close to the line for fast battleship that you can be excused. I will excuse you if you argue that they are fast battleships, but they are, thanks to subdivision and armor coverage, they are still battle cruisers. But it is so close. I will concede it is close, and I will not argue to death with you over that topic of whether they are of that one. I would just go, let's agree to disagree and get a nice burger and have a chat about this more, because it seems you're really informed and interesting, sort of thing. That's the that's the approach I take in that scenario. But with this, well, to convert those from that point to an aircraft carrier, you don't need to worry about guns. You can put more armor in magazines, but you don't want them to be in the gun combat role. They're not going to be in the firing lines. You don't have to worry about that. You have to worry about speed, you have to worry about maneuverability, and amount of aircraft they can carry and support. And that's all having a big hangar. Admittedly, someone might have the bright idea of making them completely flat top. But hopefully they don't. Hopefully no one has that idea. Hopefully they go, well, we found the island a really useful structure. Let's keep the island structure. And no, let's not have any bright ideas of having the trunking the stacks and everything out the stern of the ship and all these things. No, let's just have it go up for an island structure. It makes life a lot easier. The really interesting thing you could get is if they've decided the deck edge lifts are more useful. Because there is the discussions of deck edge lifts at this point in British. The British have become far harder with deck edge lifts as time goes on and they've lost more aircraft off the side of their ships. But the thing is, these hangars, these carriers wouldn't lose as many aircraft, and they'd have centerline lifts, which would mean you wouldn't have lost as many aircraft, which would mean someone might be tempted to try deck edge lifts. So instead of getting an Admiral class like that with those 2 big lifts, you could get an Admiral class with deck edge lifts. That would be a lot of carrier aircraft space. 3 of them. Whatever happens, it's not going to be any. The easiest solution probably is to just go for the British and Americans allowed 10 carriers up to 35,000 tons, rather than 27,000 tons. But then you're going to have to change the capital ship tonnage, because that's going to be, oh yes, we're going to have 15, allow 15 capital ships of up to 35,000 tons and 10 carriers of up to 35,000 tons. Someone is going to be crying foul. So you probably end up with carrier tonnage, capital ship tonnage as 42,000 tons if they go similar, which means Hood could scrape it in and be actually treaty compliant. But also, that means you then end up with 200. Well, let's see. 42 times 15. That's 420 plus 210. 630,000 tons of capital ship tonnage allowance for Britain and America? I mean, a Nelson and Rodney are definitely getting built under that circumstance, but so are probably a couple of friends. You might end up with, well, under that tonnage, you could probably get the Royal Navy could probably build some fast battleships. And still have the level of armour that they put into Nelson and Rodney, but have ships which actually could do 28 knots. And could probably have 3 or 4 of them. So that's going to have consequences. This is cool. Literally, the never-ending consequences of going down this scenario are massive. And it could all start with Tsingtao being just an ever so slightly better performance, and Fisher jumping on it. And it will be the first time he's jumped on the Japanese doing things to justify what he's already inclined towards. His reaction to Tsushima was a massive, woohoo, this justifies everything I've been thinking, let's do it. So, the question, as I've already said, for you to please put in the comments below, is what do you think happens post-World War I? How do you think the world changes? Be really interested to hear what you think happens. What have we got coming up next? Well, this is taking place in June, and it's the last one in June. And I do helpfully have my calendar in front of me to tell me exactly what's going on in June. And so this will be out on the 27th of June. So the next video you're going to have from me, other than a whatever I've managed to get on Saturdays and Sundays, Fridays and Saturdays, and hopefully live on Sundays while I'm wandering around, and hopefully I'm on Discord after this to chat with you all, is going to be the War Emergency ships on the 2nd. Ooh, War Emergency carriers. That'd be cool. I'm so distracted by this idea now. I'm going to get no other work done for the rest of the day. I'm going to be plotting it out. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for those people who like, share and subscribe to the videos, etc. to see more. That really does help the channel grow. And thank you to those people who are patrons, do Ko-fi, super chats, super thanks, all those things. They really do help as well. And it's really very kind of you, because frankly without them, this channel, the research wouldn't be funded. This channel is, like most channels on YouTube, is overwhelmingly funded by your generosity, not by YouTube ad revenue. I have that on because it's nothing to be sniffed at, and it does pay for a couple of books a month. But, you know, it's all thanks to you, the rest of it. Thank you very much, and take care.